Welcome to the Pastor and Intern podcast with Pastor Eric Dyer, Intern Will Emery, and Content Lead Kayla Popwell. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about staff transitions, how awkward that may be, why people come and go, what that entails. Eric, why don't you get us started?
Okay, so I thought it would be a really good spot for us to talk about our own experiences with people leaving. Now, I don't want to get into names. I don't want to get into, real specifics about any person. But I'd really like to get into, what our experiences were like when certain staff transitioned out of our life. I've got several experiences here. Some of them are more personal than others. Y'all have, I don't know how many y'all have, honestly, but I know of at least one. So, Will, why don't we start with you here? What are your experiences with staff transitions out of the ministry?
So I would say that I've been through one. So I was doing this program through the high school. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I was doing this program through the high school called work-based learning. And so basically what this was is that normally during your third and fourth block, for me it was just my fourth block, you would leave the school early to go to work or go work underneath somebody, and that would fulfill some requirements or whatever for the class. And so I was currently I was doing work-based learning underneath this person. And then I remember being confused because I didn't see it coming, right? I feel like a lot of staff transitions, you don't see them coming. A lot of they just kind of happen. Yeah. And so I didn't see it coming. But I also went with this person because I could either pick up a fourth block of the school and do something. I could do gym or something, which that looks totally like something I would do, right? Like, let's go run laps. Or I could move and continue doing what I was doing. So that's what I continue to do. And interesting in that, so I guess you could say that I've been through two quote unquote staff transitions, if I include myself in that, because personally I felt a lot. I felt like there was anger from the other side. So what do you do? I felt like it was almost as if I was betraying.
Yeah, like there's allegiance
each side. Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
like, okay, you're going against us. You're being a traitor now. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Because and we'll talk about this a little later, but there's a lot of confusion, a lot of awkwardness that comes with staff transitions, a lot of anger that seems to rise out of those. And so it felt like I was going with the anger, right? It was like, okay, you're a part of the anger. We're all mad at you, but I really enjoyed that year. It was a beneficial year to me. Met a lot of new people I would have never really met unless I had made new connections. But I don't know. So that my one transition, it was just confusing, just weird. But it was also beneficial to me personally. But I think that's unique in the situation that we were in, to me. So Kayla, what would you say? What are your staff transitions you've been a part of?
Okay, so I've only really been a part of one, or I guess you could say two, but mainly one. And to start off with, I don't feel like any staff transition is easy. I feel like you're always going to hurt somebody, whether you're trying to or not. But I was a junior in high school whenever this staff transition happened. And I will say that I was really upset because I did have a close bond with that person. Yeah. So just knowing that them leaving alone was hard enough. And I would say that I wouldn't say like Will that I didn't really see it coming. Part of me kind of felt like it might be coming, but not 100%. But I mean, it happened and was a shock for sure. But that was hard for me too because the church that the transition was to was not very far down the road from our church. Right. So I guess just you still had to see that person in town, and I don't know. It is awkward. And then I know it's awkward for them because they don't really know. Like they're at a new church, but they also don't want to completely not talk to you. So it's really awkward.
It's just a really awkward situation, and not that it was wrong on either side.
Yeah, no. And I don't have any ill will towards anyone that's left. And I understand that it was God's calling, and I fully support that person and everything that they do and pray for them to this day. But it was hard just because I know many of us in our youth group were very close with that person. So
Right. And I think I think it would have been different if this person had left and went to Montana or something, right? And you're like, never have to see them again. And you're like, okay, if they're leaving, at least they're going away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's not how it was.
And I supported that person with whatever they decided to do. But it was also hard because I would see, because we're such a small town, and I would see that person in the community with his new youth group. And I was just like, darn, like, you were my youth pastor like 2 months ago.
Right.
Like that, I don't know. It's just hard.
Right, yeah. So I've been through, and I'm older than y'all, and I've been through a couple. So when I was in the 9th grade, and I know that my wife listens to this podcast and she will correct everything that I'm going to say right now, but vaguely to my memory, this is how my life has happened, okay? So my youth pastor, when I was in the 9th grade, left our church. He didn't leave right away. He told us he was going to leave probably 6 months in advance. And I don't know that he was necessarily called to ministry. I think he tried to fit a role in the church, and he only wanted to do that for a certain amount of time. Now, I really loved this person, and I knew him from the, youth at my church was 7th grade, so 7th, 8th, and part of my 9th grade year, and then he said he was leaving. And I hadn't really been involved in a lot of children's ministry growing up. Like, I didn't have a great relationship with our children's minister when she left, so I didn't even write that one down. I think she's great. Like, I know her, but I wasn't really involved. I just wasn't. But with Tim, it was a little bit different because I just, I was confused. Like, I didn't know that this is what happened. Like, I thought this person's going to be here till I graduate, and then when I graduate, I'll move on. I'll get a college person, blah, 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 blah. Like, that was my thought process. So when he left, I would agree with y'all. There was a lot of confusion. There were some upset feelings. And I didn't even realize really that there was something new coming. Like, that never really came across in my brain, you know? And so when the new guy came in, there was a lot of hostility from me towards that person. And I really hope that person's listening to this podcast because I love that person now. Like, he is the reason why I'm in ministry. But, like, I hated that person for, like, 2 or 3 years. Just being honest. And that person knows that, so I'm not saying anything. Like I told him, like, 4 years into knowing him, I'm like, man, you know what, man? Like, when you came in, I really hated you for, like, 2 years. And he was like, yeah, I know. And we laughed because it's not like he didn't know. Like, I was a youth. Yeah. A student. Like, come on. Like, I'm going to wear my, what I think on my sleeve. Like, it's not a big a deal.
Yeah.
So that was the first one. The second one was our head pastor of the church I went to my whole life. He worked there for 18 years, and then he stepped down. And that was like, he told us ahead of time because he's a great man, and now he pastors a church probably an hour and a half away from our church now. So he doesn't live in the same town, but somewhere else. But that one was hard because he had been there since our church building was just a house. And then we built our sanctuary, and then we outgrew our sanctuary, so we built another sanctuary. So he's in 2 building transitions, and then he took like a year sabbatical, I think, but then stepped away. And this guy, like, man, talk about one of the funniest, most genuine preachers I've ever heard. And I have nothing but glowing things to say about him. But he told us, hey, this is when I'm stepping down. This is when I'm done. I've already lined up an interim to come in and preach for a while to help you transition into somebody else. He reassured us. And again, it's weird when the person leaving is reassuring you of things. Like, hey, this is not why I'm leaving. This is why I'm leaving. No one's done anything to me that made me leave. Things like that. And I can't help but hear those things and go, is that really true? Like, is that, like, did someone say something to you, or did you say the wrong thing to somebody and they got mad and you were not going to apologize for it? Things like that.
Yeah.
That always crosses my mind. But he was the head pastor of my church, and he was great. He was there for 18 years. So, the next guy was our worship pastor, and he left when he was caught in some sort of sin in his life, which was weird. Like, I'd known this guy for, since I can remember stuff, and he was a good guy, always joked around with me, but was caught in some sort of sin, and he had to step down. Now, he stepped down on his own, But that was a real shock to her system, because if you weren't really involved with what was happening with him personally, then you had no idea that this was even happening.
Yeah.
And then it all came out. Half of the church was like, hey, it's not a big deal. He should be able to stay. The other half of the church is like, he definitely needs to leave. There's a whole lot of this, and even after a year after he left, people were like, hey, why don't we just hire what's his name back? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, and they're on that line.
Right.
And so I went through that. And then the last one, we had this guy transition in. He was a little bit more well-known pastor. And he came in and really tried to revolutionize a lot of things and correct a lot of things. And he was younger. Not that there's anything wrong with that. He just was. He only lasted at our church for about 2 years. He left after I had left. I went to seminary, and then after that he had left. And then just recently we had a person on our own staff leave.
Right.
First Baptist Church. So transition is just hard, especially when it's someone that you work with, because whether you agree or disagree with anything that they do or say is irrelevant. You've been with that person in ministry for a year and a half, and you come to care about people and love them and want to see them do well and succeed in their life. And then when they announce that they're leaving, that's a hard thing to do, because there's a continuity there. Like the way she would plan things, I would help her on the back end of her older students. Like, hey, this is what you need to do, or hey, what are you doing so that I can change what I'm doing, things like that. So and I'd say it's a little bit different when you work at a church, because it's just kind of part of the process. Like, I wasn't confused. I wasn't mad. There was no like overwhelming anger in me that was happening.
Can we flesh that out a little bit? So Kayla, from a youth's perspective, from a church member's perspective, like, what does that look like? What does staff transition look like from just a regular member? You come to church. I mean, what is that?
Well, I know it's different from working in a church because you're working one-on-one with that person, but just being discipled by that person and being poured into by that person, having them leave and then having someone else come and pour into you, it's just different because people do things differently, and you get accustomed and used to how one person does things. So it's just having to get used to change, I guess. Right. Like having to just adjust to change.
Well, I asked that question because I do think there's a difference. Maybe not a difference in the situation, but a difference on perspective, right? So I feel like and Eric can tell you a lot more about this than I can, but if you work at a church, then I think it's less about looking from what was and looking to what's next, right? So through a staff transition, you're like, okay, what's coming next? What do we need to do? What do we need to prepare for? How are we going to fill this important role that was, the person did a really good job at it? How do we fill this?
Yeah.
But I think from a member's perspective, it's less about what's next. It's about maybe like what could have been or what was. What this person had on me it was a great influence. I'm going to miss that. I don't want that to change.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a difference there from perspectives.
Well, that's very true, and that's a good way to put it, because in my mind, whenever that person was here, I thought to myself, oh, they'll be here till I graduate high school.
Right, exactly.
We'll get to do all these other things. So whenever they left, I was not really thinking about who was going to be coming next. I was more focused on the fact that they left.
Right. And I think working at a church, the difference is it's more like a job.
Yeah.
Right. It's got like a job element to it. Like, okay, I understand. I've worked in the workforce before. I understand. But on the flip side of that, though, it's weird. So it's like this balancing act of it's a job, but also you're shepherding people.
Yeah.
Like you're biblically leading people in the way that they should go. And when it's like a scale, like you've got to have these two things even, because once they become more like a work than shepherding, then it's less joyful to come to church. Like when okay, this person's just here because it's their job, then it becomes more about that. But if it becomes more shepherding than job, it feels like nobody has any real authority or anything like that going on. And I think the overarching element that I want to focus on, not right now, but just to kind of put in the back of y'all's mind, is instead of focusing, and I would challenge our listeners with this too, is instead of focusing on what could have been or what's next, what I challenge people to think about is the question, what is God doing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like how often do we stop in the storm of this transition, either in or out, and think to ourselves, what is God doing to the church right now? Like, how is he forming it to be different or better? Or what is God's end goal here? And it's not always clear in the moment. Like, it's not always like God's like, here's the sign, you know, this is what we're doing. But at the same time, I feel like we miss some growth there when we go, okay, let me put my feelings aside for just a second and put what I think aside for just a moment and think about, okay, what is God trying to do here? Because even in my transition into First Baptist Church, you know, and I don't think I'm all that great, but when I think about the transition, I think, okay, I've seen what God was trying to do then and what he's accomplished now. Not saying that my ministry's over by any means, but it's like I saw what people needed, that God needed to do, and I've seen how God has done that. And it's not all me. Like, it has to do with several people, especially with some leaders that have come in and come out, you know, things like that. But anyway, so let's talk about some common denominators here about some of our issues. Why do you think confusion exists in these transitions?
Because you just don't, a lot of times you just don't understand. Because I think we look at transitions not that this is necessarily a wrong way of looking at them, maybe, but we look at them selfishly almost, like it's about me, it's affecting me, it's and so I think confusion comes from that perspective of it being about me.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, you know, you think that person's going to be there through whenever. They're going to be there through this event and this event and this event, and then they're not, and that's just what you had planned.
Yeah.
So you're like, what in the world? What happened? Why now?
Yeah. So. Well, and two, it can be confusing because you're also not in their shoes, so you don't know what they're feeling. You don't know how God's speaking to them. So them telling it to you, like, you're just so focused on the fact that they're going to be gone that you're not really processing what the Lord might be doing in their life or how the position they're in is going. Like, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like you really have to be in their shoes to 100% understand their reasoning behind leaving.
It's almost impossible for them to sit down with every single person and be like, okay, this is why I'm leaving.
Right.
You know, like, that's exhausting. You know, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I think it also happens because, you know, y'all are talking about it from, you know, really a youth pastor perspective, even from a head pastor perspective. People are like, why would you want to leave this place? We love this place. This is why we choose to come here twice a week. Right. Or once a week or whatever it is.
But also, I feel like being a member of a church and working for a church, you see different things in the church.
Yeah.
So when you're a member, I don't feel like you're really getting the full picture of all the ins and outs that goes on inside of a church.
And unfortunately, you know, it's like this game of passing down information. And we all know that when, you know, the information gets to the 6th, 7th, 8th person, it could be completely different than the first person. Right. And so you're hearing things, you're like, well, that's the opposite of what so-and-so told me. So-and-so's leaving because of this. I'm like, well, that's the opposite of what so-and-so. So I can see how confusion literally leaks out of everything, especially when a staff is trying to transition into something else. So what about the anger part? This upset part, where does that stem from? Like, what's the issue there?
I think a lot of it stems out of the confusion. I think it probably starts. You hear someone's leaving, you're confused, right? I don't get it, and then out of that comes your anger.
Yeah.
Now, something I've been just while we're talking, thinking about, and maybe struggling with a little bit is anger is it a right response? Is it an okay response?
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask.
Or is it a negative? I mean, because if we truly believe that God's doing something, then should we be angry at that, or should we be, you know, maybe in a supportive role, like, oh, you go, do your thing? Because I think it's okay to be frustrated because of the confusion, right? I don't think that's wrong. I don't think it's wrong to look up to your youth pastor or your head pastor and think, okay, this person's going to be here through event A, event B, event C. I'm going to need them to do that. I don't think that's necessarily a wrong perspective to have. But then when that perspective blows up, of course, there's going to be confusion and anger that comes out of it.
Well, I think that a lot of your anger and frustration can stem from selfishness, just being selfish. Like, I know that I would always be frustrated and angry, like, whenever that staff transition happened, because I didn't get to spend as much time with that person one-on-one, that you can't have the same relationship whenever you're at a different church.
Right.
And
Right.
that's just, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how it is. But I honestly was jealous and just being selfish because I saw him forming those same relationships with other people at his new church. And that was just hard. And there's nothing wrong with that. That person didn't do anything wrong. But I guess just our human nature, I was just being selfish, and I was honestly jealous because I wasn't getting that anymore.
Right. Well,
I think that's one side of it. I think it's a two-sided coin. I just think it's on one side there is the selfishness. I want this person to be in my life, not theirs. I want them to be part of our church, not theirs. But I think on the flip side of that, I think it's totally okay to be mad.
Yeah.
We see several moments in Scripture where someone or God, for example, is angry at the situation, and I think if it's like a, I don't really know how to explain it. When you love your pastor, and that pastor decides to leave, that hurts you, and I think you can be mad about that. You're like, I love this person, and they're choosing to leave, like that makes me mad, and I think that's okay. Now you have to. Now what you do with that anger is different. Like, that's a whole different conversation. Right. But I think the initial anger of that, I think is okay. I think it's warranted, because it would be weird if we were all peachy about it and super happy that our pastor was leaving.
Yeah,
yeah,
like
probably
that would be weird. But
and two, whenever you have a youth pastor at your church, a lot of times, I know for us, they walk through the things that you're walking through in life with you.
Mm-hmm.
So then when they leave, you don't have that anymore. And I know for me, that was a really hard time in my life whenever that person left. It just happened to be in the middle of like one of the hardest couple of years in my life. So whenever they left, I really took it personally just because I didn't have that person there to walk through that with me anymore.
Right. And I think the anger in that is okay because you're like, man, I wanted this. I needed this in my life and I did not get it. And I don't think that's selfish.
No. Well, and I like what you said earlier about I think it's really beneficial, and something I wish I would have done is to stop and think, okay, what is God? What is he doing through this? What is he? And I think that can apply not only to this situation, but every situation is okay. I don't like this. This is weird. What's going on? What is he doing through this? What is he doing in this? And I think that helps form our perspective maybe differently. Yeah.
And you saying that, I did, out of that person leaving, I do feel like I did grow because that person was at our church since I was got in youth and then up until my junior year of high school. So I do feel like I was getting really comfortable and kind of depending on that person. I wasn't really growing personally. I was more so just depending on that person to pour into me. I wasn't investing in myself.
Right.
So when that person left, I realized that I have to dig into the word myself. I can't depend on that person for everything or a youth pastor for everything. It's mine and the Lord's relationship. It's not mine, my youth pastor, and the Lord's relationship.
Right. I think that was great. That's a good conversation to have. I don't feel like we have this conversation often. We kind of try to reject it and
everybody's
push
scared
it away.
Yeah.
So before we get into the hopefully happier part of transitioning in instead of out, let's hear from our sponsor, the CSB Bible. Our goal and mission is to have more people read the Bible. The top two things people want in the Bible translation is a Bible that is easy to read, but is also faithful to the original languages. The CSB strives to be accurate, readable, and shareable. Accurate to the original languages, easy to read and understand, and a Bible that you can feel confident sharing with people. Our hope is that the CSB is a Bible pastors feel comfortable preaching from while also being a translation that all church members feel comfortable reading from in their own personal time. The Word of God is living and effective, transforming the hearts of people, and as a result, transforming the way people live. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about our experiences with people leaving, let's talk about our experiences with people that are new. So I think the awkwardness is there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but it's a little bit different because it's not the awkwardness of the unknown, right? Like when someone's not there after someone leaves, it's awkward because you don't know what's happening. You don't know what to do. And then this all new person shows up with all these other things that they are. And everybody's like, oh, hey, it's like, how are you? I had a conversation with a student yesterday, and she said that on one of the big events we do here at M Now, I was sitting on the bus before I'd even been hired here, and she was the first person on the bus for like 5 minutes or whatever. And she's like, I'm just going to walk past him. I'm not going to say hello. And she's like, and you tried to talk to me. It was so weird. And I was like, well, like, what do you want me to do? It's like this weird transitionary period. So kind of talk to me about your experiences with new people, quote unquote, like people that have either just come in or you went somewhere where you were new and you had to meet these new people that were your pastors or whatever. I don't really care which one of you goes first. I think I'm going to go to Will first.
Okay, well, so I'll tell you from my perspective of going somewhere else, because I think me and Kayla can both agree that the only time I can think of, at least, when somebody new came in was you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we get there, I'll tell you. I remember there was awkwardness there, but it's hard. Mm-hmm. That's a really hard spot. And even then, it wasn't as bad. I could imagine trying to be a youth pastor and come in, but just from being a student and I don't even want to call myself an intern at that point, just in work-based learning, to come in and have to meet all these people who, especially in youth, who have grown up together, who have, because in a small community like this, you have your little cliques, and these are my people, and those are your people, and we hang out together at school, we hang out together at church. This is it. And so I think that's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to feel like you fit in. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of, you have to really, really try.
And two, it's not like you came in after someone that had only been here for 1 or 2 or 3 years. You had to fill in the shoes of someone that had been here for a very long time. Yeah. So I could not imagine. I have a lot of respect for people like you that just come to a new church and meet all these new people.
So, okay. So actually, Kayla, you go first. Your perspective on somebody new coming, because I wasn't here.
Yeah, you weren't here.
When you came, I wasn't officially. I was leaving for college.
You literally left to where I came from.
Yeah, and so I wasn't. I wasn't really. Yeah. So I can tell you from an outsider's, but you give us like an insider.
Well, to start off with, I was really praying that the Lord would send someone here that would just fit the needs that this church needed. And so whenever you and Julia came the first time, I think I met y'all was at M Now, and y'all weren't hired on then, I don't think. Y'all were just visiting.
Yeah, it was a pretty much concluded, like, this is what's happening. And it was like, okay, now you need to kind of, mingle with some people.
Yeah. Well, to start off with, I did not know you or Julia at all. I'd never seen y'all in my life because y'all weren't from here. So it's not like we just had someone that had lived in this town coming in. Like, none of us really knew. So it was different, and it is awkward, like trying to get to know a person. I can't imagine you having to try to meet like 50 different kids. But I don't know. I mean, my experience with it was really good. I mean, obviously, like, I love you and Julia, and I'm so glad that y'all came to our church. But I mean, there's nothing really bad I can say about it. I mean, it was awkward. I will say that, but
right. Well, I think another problem is trust. Yeah, I think that's a big. It's really hard to trust the new guy. Yeah, because especially when the old guy who's been here for a while leaves. Yeah, and then that's stuck in your head, and you're like, okay, you're just gonna leave.
Well,
you're just gonna.
And that brings up a good point, because in a way, it kind of makes you not want to get close with that person, because you know that you're just going to be torn if they leave again like you were the first time. Right. So I feel like it is hard. Like, I completely agree with what you said.
I remember sitting at him now, and you coming in with one of the leaders, and thinking, man, that guy has no idea what he's walking into. Like, if only he knows, if he knew the situation, if he knew, and they're great kids. Nothing against the youth group here is amazing, but it's like, if only he knew what he was going to walk into. And then I also remember being like, I don't know, it's going to sound really terrible on my part, but being like frustrated / angry, like, because I experienced a lot of hostility from different people here and there, and thinking they don't deserve a new youth pastor. I want them to continue to, and that makes me sound terrible.
Oh my gosh!
I know that makes me sound like the worst person in the world, but and so I remember just being honest, looking at you and him now and thinking, number one, that you're not going to like that. That's going to stink. And I think you liked it. And then being like, you just go somewhere else. You don't need to go there. Just leave, go somewhere else.
Well, and two, I feel like it brings out frustration in people in the youth, like students in the youth, because some students, I feel like, were so used to the previous youth pastor that when you came in, like, or anyone at any church really, that you're not really given a fair chance. I feel like people think that the new person that comes in has to be exactly like the old one.
Yeah.
And you're different people. That's not how it's going to be. So I feel like I got frustrated because I would hear people be like, well, it's just not like whenever so-and-so was here. And I mean, yeah, they're not the same person, but...
Right, exactly. Can't expect the same thing.
Yeah. So, I don't know. There was frustration in that way, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
I agree.
Well, transitioning in is so weird. I don't know that I really felt comfortable in my own skin until this past August. I mean, because you're coming in, like, you're not only meeting 50 to 60 students, you're meeting at least 120 parents. Like, you're meeting 200 people that you have to be severely intentional with. Probably over that, honestly, because there's a ton of grandparents here too. And then you've got to get to know the older crowd. You've got to get to know your pastor. You've got to get to know your staff. You got to do all that stuff. And I remember just sitting and I talk about this experience all the time. I was sitting in him now, and it was almost over. And I'm not hired. I don't work here. It's weird. I don't understand it. But I'm sitting in the crowd or whatever, and they're like, thank your youth pastor for all that they've done for you and about this trip or whatever. And everyone looked at me, and I put my hands up. And now you know me, so this is what I would do. But I was like, no, this is not me. This is Denise. This is not me. She did all this. The leaders did all this. Look to them, give them the credit. I'm not even hired here. Like, I'm just here. I'm a spectator at best. And then you try to have these really weird conversations. And we had a couple of students get up and talk a couple weeks ago. And I got to comment on what they said, which is my favorite part about anything. And I got to tell them about the first time that I interacted with them and how weird it was. Just, like, I had this terrible conversation with one of my seniors that graduated this year. It was just like the most mortifying, humiliating, probably the dumbest stuff I've ever said, and just looking back on it, we can laugh about it because, we like each other now. Like, we've been around each other for a while. But coming into a new church where you've not lived here, honest, didn't even know Blackshear existed. Just going to be real. I didn't know it was a thing. Getting to know another head pastor, being the guy over the youth ministry and not just someone who worked in youth ministry. There's just all of these different factors.
And I think it's harder. I think it may be harder for youth pastors than it would be really any other transition.
Yeah.
Only because students are going to be harder they're going to hold on to that, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Than maybe adults would.
But the great part about that is that every year that a class graduates, you get farther and farther away from that previous person.
Right.
Like the first year that I sent seniors out, that was the year that I realized, and it took me 8 months to realize it, shocker, but it took me 8 months to realize that these kids aren't mine. They're somebody else's. And I'm going to try to reach them, try to love them, try to do everything I can, but they're somebody else's. Now, there's always a few that I got that I feel like are mine, quote unquote, but they're not mine. But this past year, though, is almost 100% different. Like, they're all mine, all of them. Every single one of them, to me, were mine. Like, I felt like I was responsible for how they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you feel some sort of ownership over that. And then next year, and then the next year, and then, God willing, if I make it to the 7th graders this year, like, they don't even know the previous youth pastor. Yeah. All they know is me. And so there's, like, this weird, and I know that sounds weird, right? Like, it's not like I'm trying to trash somebody else or talk bad about somebody else, but that's just an obstacle.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's important to note is that every transition normally isn't out of like that. Like we shouldn't look to that person and want to trash them or want to talk. They had their reasons and they left for that reason, and that's was their choice, and they did that. That's fine. That's good. If that's what they feel like God's calling them to do, then that's great.
Right.
They should do that.
So in that, how do we make these? Because inevitably we're going to be going to churches where staff are in and out. You know, especially the staff rate right now. You know, if you were to look at the staff ratios right now, like every 3 years, youth pastors leave their church. Every 3 years, that's the math. And every 2 years, a head pastor leaves.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's like 18 to 24 months, head pastors are gone to the next church, and then every 24 to 36, youth pastors are gone.
I didn't realize it was.
Right, which it's pretty nuts, right?
Right.
And I don't know that has anything to do with them feeling welcome, but I think it has. I think it's a problem with the church and a problem with pastors, but that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. So how do we make these new people feel welcome? I mean, like, how do we help that transition? Because as we've said, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's awkward. It's weird, but it's necessary. Like you have to plug someone in there.
Right.
So how do we make this person feel welcome?
Lower your expectations is what I would encourage a member to do.
Okay.
Don't expect them to be the same person that was there. Don't expect them to be like the same person that was there.
Yeah.
I think anger and stuff will come out of that. Just expect them to be their own person.
I was going to say, don't compare the two.
Right. Don't expect the ministry to be the same. I mean, with a different person comes different things, different events. And so that would be my biggest encouragement to members in particular, is to lower your expectations. Do not expect, because you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
You're going to be super disappointed because nobody's going to be the same in ministry. You're not going to have the same guy do. They're not going to do the same things.
I also think that you should pray for that person that's in the transition and their family, and also, I mean, just the members of the church that are also going through that transition, that they'll greet them with an open heart and open mind and just welcome them like they welcomed the previous person.
Right.
I think the two things I would say, and I feel like this church did a really good job of, is just put yourself out there and talk to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just give them a shot. Like,
yeah.
And if you don't like them, you don't like them, and you can move on with your life. But at least give it a shot. Like, don't stay in the background and go, well, I just don't like that person, so I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really terrible perspective. Because I could totally understand a youth coming a whole month in a row and saying, you know what, I'm just not connecting, and then not coming back. I totally get that. What I don't understand is when they just don't. That's probably been my biggest struggle in youth ministry, is I've had a handful of students that didn't try, and I never saw them again. You know, and it didn't matter if I reached out to them personally or their parents or their friends, whatever it was. They just weren't coming back. And so I would just encourage people, you know, just step out there and say, you know what, I'm going to talk to this person. Like, even if it's like grinding my teeth awkward, I'm going to talk to this guy or this girl or whoever. And the second thing I would say is just be available to them. Like, be a soundboard for them. Like, hey, how am I doing? Like, and I know that we always want to say, oh, you're doing great, you know, keep up the good work, you know, which is good, but tell me what I need to be doing. Tell me what I need to, like, you know, the church members know the heartbeat of the church better than I do. You know, like, I just moved here, you know, and there's some things I had to find out slowly but surely, painfully, that felt obvious to everybody else that wasn't obvious to me, and I just had to figure it out. But it would have helped me if more people had been like, hey, this is what you should probably do. This is what you should probably avoid. You probably shouldn't put a conflict here. You shouldn't schedule an event on this night because no one's going to come, you know, because they're doing this other thing that they want to do, which they should do, and just all of that stuff. So that's probably what I would say to make a pastor, you know, feel more welcome. And before we get to the big question at the end here, I just kind of want to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to comment on your thoughts. It's my favorite thing about my transition. Like, in your mind, you know, you're a little bit different, so you're probably going to have to do more of when you started working here than anything. But you were here when I started, so just kind of talk about that year, because I only had you for a year.
Yeah.
Just kind of talk about, like, you know, the thoughts, the concerns, how it ended. And this isn't to, flatter me or anything. Like, it's not what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But just to give people that are listening a hands-on, like, this is what I went through. So why don't you go first?
Okay. I would say the first, probably, because y'all were officially hired on in August?
September 1st.
Okay, well, really close, but
Yeah,
September
you're really
1st.
close, yeah.
So the first, probably up until, I would say, like, the end of January, I didn't really feel like I had, of course, I mean, y'all just moved here, but I didn't feel like I had as close of a relationship with y'all.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I was kind of trying to figure y'all out.
Yeah.
And just see, like, kind of how y'all were and, build a connection there, I guess. But honestly, whenever I became the closest with y'all was whenever Julia had girls' Bible study and I was over, even though it wasn't even really you, it was Julia.
It was not, yeah.
And I was coming over to y'all's house once a week. I don't know. Just whenever you invite someone to your house, I feel like it's easier to bond with them. You're not in such a tense setting. But, I mean, the first couple months, I didn't really feel like I had a strong connection with y'all. I liked y'all.
Yeah.
But I feel like it takes time for sure.
Yeah. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, but it was good. It obviously turned out good.
Yeah, it's turned out good now, right?
I'm really close with y'all now.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I had a student who still I see regularly that graduated with you, and he all the time tells me, he goes, I really wish I would have came to youth more your first year.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, and he said what you said earlier, which piqued my interest. He said, I just thought you were going to come here, hate it, and leave.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to get close to you. And he goes, but now that I know who you are and I know that you're staying here, he's like, man, I feel like I've wasted a whole year or whatever. Because, like, the last month of his senior year, he was at everything. Like, literally at everything. And he was like, man, I feel like and it's not that I'm even that great, but it's like that relationship forms.
Yeah.
It's like that thing that an 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old needs in their life. That's not their mom or their dad, It's just something different. And he was very much like, man, I really wish I had put in more effort the past 8 months than I have in this 1 month.
Well, I feel like you do have to understand that it is going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to come, and it doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
But.
Right.
Yeah, so mine's different. Right.
It is different.
I remember, so I left for college at Scarborough College Southwestern when you were coming. I remember my first interaction with Eric was when I posted that I was going to Southwestern.
Yep.
And he commented on my post.
I did.
We were like ships passing through the night or something like that.
That's what I said. Yep.
And I was like, I still don't like this guy. But
this guy needs to shut it.
And then I came home for fall break or something, and it was a Sunday, and we talked or something. Then we went to lunch, and then in December, I came home for Christmas break. We ate at Taco Bell.
Yeah.
And that's when you offered me.
Hallelujah.
You offered me the job that I'm in now.
Yeah. And you were like,
I didn't think anything of it after you did it. I was like, no, this isn't.
You know what? This guy's the
I'm
worst.
going back to school.
Yeah.
No way. And then in April, I think it was April. I don't remember when.
I don't remember.
The ball started rolling. And then tomorrow has been a year. Will be 1 year officially that I've been back.
Wow.
As an intern. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I jumped right in, and we went to Mission Lab and summer camp, and it just wasn't. And maybe that's just me personally. I didn't think anything. I thought you graduated from Southwestern. You were great. I don't know. I didn't have that.
You jumped. You kind of had to jump into it. 1 and 2, you had a year perspective.
Right. Well, very true. I didn't know. Yeah. Well, that's also that's a good point. I took off for a year.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and also Eric had a year to kind of get used to things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you weren't meeting him when he was getting used to things too.
Right. And so there was, and I remember coming in and thinking, why are we doing that? Why aren't we playing, for example, why aren't we playing Beast Mode? We've done that forever.
Gosh.
Why are we not doing that?
I'm stupid.
So there were little things like that I was like, we've always done that. Why are we not doing that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I fully came in with the perspective that we're just gonna, we're gonna make this thing work. I was excited, ready to do it. So I don't know. Mine's just different, I think. It wasn't time for me. I just jumped right in.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I really want to say about this, and then we can move on, is the worst part about the beginning of my job was not being new. It wasn't the awkwardness, because if you know me, I handle awkwardness pretty well.
Thrive.
I thrive when it's weird.
Right.
And I just do. It's just, if you're a pastor, you know what I'm talking about. And like I'm good with adults. I'm good with teenagers. There's nothing about that. But it's more about feeling like I'm not the last guy. So it's a very defeating thing, and has nothing to do with value or who's better than whoever. It's more like when people are like, "Well, we've never done it this way," and that immediately makes me think you're referencing the last person. Like, whether you mean to or not is a whole nother issue. But when you say, "Well, we've always done it this way," in my mind, that means, oh, you mean this is what the last person did. And for me, that's like a boulder smashing on the top of my head. I'm like, really? Like you couldn't have phrased that any differently. Like, and it's nobody's fault, but that's the worst part.
Yeah.
About ministry.
And too, you knew how upset everyone here was when that person left. So I feel like you thought you had like extremely big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of why I said that it was kind of frustrating for me whenever I would hear people like, well, we've never done that. We're not doing this anymore. But
yeah. Well, and it's like people would come up to me. It's like this double. I don't even really know how to describe it. People would come up to me and tell me, "Hey, this is what has happened before you got here." And again, you hear it from like 8 different people from 8 different perspectives, and they just lay it all out there. I didn't want to know, by the way, but it just happened. I'm good with it now. And then on the flip side, they want to tell you why you shouldn't do it the way you want to do it, because that's how the last person did it. So it's like a double whammy, right? Like you're trying to be something different than what they had, but then when you try to do that, they want what they have always had. And it's like this weird pull.
It's like you can't win for losing.
Yeah, you can't win. It's just like, man, I just feel like I'm losing and losing and losing and losing. You know, like, and that's an even worse feeling than when I showed up my first day and there were 5 people here. You know, like it's even worse when it's like the conversation is steered that way, and you know, it's just hard. And there's nothing wrong with people bringing up the previous person. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm comfortable with it now. You know, like I just get it. It's part of y'all's life. I get it. There's nothing wrong with it. But when I first started working here, it's hard because, you know, me and Will talk about this all the time, but it's like that when you go to summer camp and you have all those memories, and like these students have all these memories with this previous person. Like, oh man, you remember when we went here and did this, or do you remember when we did that, or whatever? And in the beginning, that's hard to hear because it's like, I don't have any of those. I wasn't a part of that. I wasn't even there. Like, I can't even tell you what that was like.
Well, it sounds kind of weird, but you, in a way, feel kind of left out.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, because I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. You know,
yeah,
right. I don't really know. But now we've been on a couple of trips. We're going on another trip here in a couple of weeks, and we're forming these moments.
Yeah,
they're so fun
together, and they're so much fun, and they're so great. And I've heard less about the moments of the past, right? And I've heard more about what's happened in the past 2 school years.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just some perspective. So let's wrap it up here with this question, the what is God doing question, because I feel like that is probably the most important thing that we've brought up so far. And you've referenced it and I've referenced it. But when you're thinking about what God is doing, and I'll kind of give my perspective at the end, but when you think about transition, and you think about what God is doing, why is it helpful for us to think, okay, I know this is hard. I don't really want to be going through this right now, but what is God actively doing in my life, in the life of the church? Like, why is that a good thought to have?
I think it gives some sort of, I don't know, some sort of peace, maybe something. I think it helps a lot when we think, okay, there's nothing I can do, nothing that, no feeling I can have that's going to make this feel better. It's almost like we just, I don't know, we have to look and think, what is God doing? I don't know. I think it gives some kind of he's doing something, and we know he's doing something. We know he's provident over everything, so he's doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's encouraging in the way that to remind ourselves that he's not left us. Just because this person is left does not mean God's leaving with the person.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's...
I feel like it teaches you to trust in the Lord in a different way. And two, like you said, like you know that he's doing something, but having to trust that he's doing something even though you might not be able to see it. So I feel like having faith without seeing what's happening kind of teaches you that in a way.
Right.
Yeah, and especially for me transitioning in, it's one of those things where when you're the guy, you've got to kind of see the problems. Like, okay, what are the issues? What are the problems? What needs to be ironed out? What needs to be solved or whatever? And you define those pretty clearly in your own way, however you understand those. And then you say, okay, God, what do I need to do to make sure these things don't happen? The problems that I came into, how do I make sure that those are gone by the time that this year's over? And it's little things like that, and it sets you up for success. And it all stems out of what is God doing right now? And I think the overarching point here is when I started in that September up until now, is the simple fact that God has done a lot here at First Baptist Church in these 2 school years that I've been here. And it's not just youth ministry, it's everything. Like, this church looks differently now than when I started. And I think we have to constantly remind ourselves of that because, as Will knows, when you work at a church, it's frustrating sometimes. Like, you just get frustrated. You're at the end of your wits. You just don't know what to do about a certain situation. That's the moment when you need to look back and go, okay, God has moved us from here to here. And that's something that he deserves praise and glory and everything for. Because if we were still back here, there'd been no movement. But now we're here. Because God is doing something actively. So even when God is moving someone out of your church and moving someone into your church, he's doing something, And again, that's not a slight to anyone who's been here and gone. It's not a slight to anybody who's been here that's been great. But God is actively doing something when staff changes happen in a church. Because the reality is that we don't worship the staff members. Mm-hmm. We worship the God that the staff members serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And a lot of times we might get that a little twisted. Sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, we're worshiping God vicariously through this person or the idea of what this person's supposed to be. When in reality, the God of the universe is in control of it. He's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, you don't need to worry. This is the plan. This is what I want. This is who I want. And sometimes that takes longer than others to find that person. Sometimes it takes a year. Sometimes it takes 3 years. It takes time to find that right person. And I think, after my first year, the real work started. Like, okay, I've got the foundation here. They know me. I have a new group of 7th graders coming in. I just got a new group of 6th graders that are about to finish their first year in youth, and they're like 100% different than they were when they started. And God's he's faithful. I mean, he's gonna take care of you. He's gonna do what's best, even if you don't understand it, even if you're angry, even if you're confused, even if you don't know where to turn and you feel like he's left. God is doing something actively. So, thank you for listening to the Pastor and Intern podcast. We want to always thank our church family for all that we do. Thank you for all of our subscribers. Without you, we'd have no one to talk to.
Be sure that you go and follow all of our social media accounts, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep up with everything going on with the podcast, and make sure to subscribe.
We are for the word, for the truth, and for the church. Thanks again for listening to the Pastor and Intern podcast.